The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Can technology deliver the dream of better cities that work for all? Or is the pursuit of the smart city a bad idea? We'll see what computes tonight. Then, why author Paris Marx thinks looking to Silicon Valley for the future of transportation is a road to nowhere. And Nan Kiwanuka finds out what urban planning through a human rights lens looks like. It's Thursday, October 27th, and that's all ahead on the agenda. Not long ago, a techno-marvel smart everything project was going to reinvent cities, starting right on the waterfront of Ontario's capital city. And then it didn't happen. Maybe that's not a bad thing. Seems to be the conclusion of some people who think about cities a lot. Let's find out more from Vas Bednar. She is Executive Director at McMaster University's Master of Public Policy in Digital Society program. John Lawrence is here, journalist and author of Dream States, Smart Cities, Technology, and the Pursuit of Urban Utopias. And Josh O'Kane, technology reporter for the Globe and Mail, and he's got a book too called Sideways, the City Google Couldn't Buy. Great to have you all around our table here at TVO tonight. Josh, going to put you to work first.
All right.
We're going to talk about smart cities.
Sure.
I need you to define what they are.
Well, a smart city is kind of a buzzword when we're thinking about like what the realm of possibility of what technology could do for us. In like 2007, 2008, these new things called smartphones were suddenly just in everyone's pockets, and people were thinking, well, what could be smart next? And this group of companies, Siemens, Cisco, IBM, wanted to sort of rewire cities and get things like central command centers to really, kind of make cities a little bit more efficient from like the way that they're run. That did not necessarily go over well. There were a lot of cost overruns, a few controversies. Places like Songdo in South Korea, it was not necessarily a sort of a great, successor to the smartphone. And then in sort of the mid-2010s, 7 or 8 years later, there was sort of the social media world, and those sort of companies started thinking, well, what can we do for cities? Specifically with this company called Sidewalk Labs that wanted to build a city from the internet up by thinking about cities from what can we do, for people? What can we really make the sidewalk itself a lab? And think about how can we, embed technologies to make life better for everyday people. But is there such a thing as a smart city? Not necessarily, because no one's really ever actually built one in a successful way that's been celebrated as something that has made life better for people.
So Vas, what would it look like sort of on the ground? If you lived in a smart city or a smart neighborhood, you would therefore what?
Well, I guess if we think of smart cities in that binary way that you're either a smart city or you're not, that's where it kind of falls down, right? Because what we're pointing to is the targeted application of particular technologies that are meant to enhance our civic life. Manage traffic better, manage garbage disposal better, help kind of flow people through a city. Try to learn from everything that's going on inside a city to make cities arguably better, more efficient, better run. So what would it mean if we were living in one? I mean, ideally, you wouldn't necessarily know. Not in the sense that it's deceptive, but everything would be
work better.
A little bit smoother.
Got it. As you look at a map of the world, can you point to a dot anywhere that says, oh, that's a smart city? They're doing all of those things.
Well, there are, as Josh mentioned, there are places that self-describe as smart cities, like Songdo, South Korea, and there are cities that have invested a lot of money in these technologies. But I think that the thing about the smart city label is that it's actually quite constrained, and what cities are is much bigger than that, and much more complicated and more resilient to and defiant about the imposition of a set of technologies. And so I think that that's why it's difficult to actually say, okay, well, this is a great working example.
Does the idea appeal to you, though?
I think that it's an overly narrow set of solutions to the nature of urban life, right? It's I was in Mexico City a couple of weeks ago. It's 22 million people. There are an incredible number of things going on all at the same time. It's a very vibrant place, and I was walking around thinking, there's no way that you could actually kind of come up with an inventory of technologies that manage that space, and that's a good thing, I think.
You prefer the sort of more organic way of
Yeah,
work.
I believe in the notion of messy urbanism, and that it's that cities were not meant to be kind of managed in a rational way like that.
Vast, does the notion of a smart city appeal to you, generally speaking?
Elements of a smarter city certainly appeal to me. And I think we hear that from citizens now and then, but not always articulated in that way. So for instance, with something like speed cameras that we're starting to get used to, we have expectations that this will be a more kind of efficient, effective application of, equitably penalizing people who speed in certain areas. And then as we learn more about them, we realize that they come with additional costs. There's a human element to this. We have to send tickets within 30 days. Sometimes these are turned off. So, the idea that a technological intervention is a substitute for governance, oversight, humans for people in some way, I think that's where it falls apart. Would I like to be able to have my Presto card on my phone so that when I lose it, things like that? Like, is that a smart city, or is that just a smarter use of technologies that sort of help us get around? I think that's maybe where we can get tripped up in some of the conversation.
Do I was in New York a few months ago.
Yeah.
Just for a little short trip. You can take your smartphone and you can put it over a scanner to go into the subway. You can't do that here yet. Why not?
I mean, that's a larger question around procurement and government spending than I'm ready to answer, but
It was more of a rhetorical question, I guess.
well, one of the smartest things I think we can do as cities is anticipate where these trends are going on the horizon and make sure that we're also being quote unquote smart about the policy environment and our governance approach to these technologies. And I think that's illuminated in both of these books and the work that you're doing.
Well, speaking of which, Josh, when you were doing your research for your book, did you come to a conclusion about whether, you three think about this stuff for a living. Do you know whether the public is actually interested in living in a quote-unquote smart or smarter city?
So some of the research that was actually done about what Sidewalk Labs was trying to do in Toronto in partnership with Waterfront Toronto basically showed that about half of the public wasn't even really aware of what was even happening. People are going about their day-to-day lives and they just want things to improve their day-to-day lives. They're not necessarily thinking on these big terms that people who work for sort of large private companies or are thinking are members of government or thinking about those two sorts of parts of society are thinking about all the time. So it's not necessarily something that everyone wants. I think everyone would love the idea of heated sidewalks that sort of make your bike lane safe and dry in the middle of winter, which is something that Sidewalk Labs proposed. But that often gets lost in the mix of, well, what are we supposed to be thinking about? Like, what order should we be thinking about all of these things when we want to propose a smart city in the first place? And that goes to Vas's point about should we be thinking about policy in the first place, about things like, say, privacy. The word censor showed up dozens of times in Sidewalk Labs' original response to the requested proposals that Waterfront Toronto put out that led to this whole project in the first place. And so, there are a lot of really big implications that perhaps governments should be thinking about before they embark on these sort of big, shiny, glossy projects.
Okay, having said that, Vast, can you think of any examples in one of the bigger cities of this province of Ontario where technology has been brought to bear to, I don't care if it's for road construction or garbage pickup or whatever, pick a problem. Technology was brought to bear, they came up with a solution, things work better.
So in terms of technology coming first and then that catalyzing a policy response? No, I can't come up with that, but maybe I could point to something that John tackles in his book, which is wastewater surveillance. That's an application of technology where arguably we've become used to anonymized, aggregated data giving us key public health indicators. And it's not something that we necessarily incorporate into our vision of what it means to be quote unquote smart, but it's us using new indicators that we didn't have before. And it's a form of kind of soft surveillance. So are we viewing that as a success? There are scholars who are making the very important point that we actually don't quite yet have the right governance regime for this approach. But at the same time, you haven't seen the kind of citizen resistance to it that we saw and that we've seen in other jurisdictions opposing the applications of these new technologies.
You want to speak to that? Because that was big during COVID.
Yeah, and that's an example where where there's a set of technologies like water sampling and a public policy objective and sort of a way of disseminating the information. So it actually, I think it's a really good example. I mean, another example which I think has a great deal of promise and uses digital technology more is managing electrical grids, right? So to decarbonize, if you live in an area where electricity is clean, like Ontario, you want to move as much away from natural gas and fossil fuels to electricity. But managing the electrical grid is really, really complicated. And there are interesting, emerging, and in-use technologies that that are able to sort of adjust loads. And, so I have, for example, I have, a smart thermostat in my house, which has an app on my phone.
Which means what?
Which means that it automatically adjusts. It's got sensors in the house, and so I don't have to do anything about it. It keeps the temperature right. And then it also feeds data on my energy consumption to the company, which uses it for research purposes, and, helps to assess what energy loads are like, when people are using more electricity. And that's a kind of application which I think is smart, and it's necessary, right? It's not surveillance. And
well, okay, that's what I want to follow up on, because that's theoretically when you use your power in your home is kind of private proprietary information of yours. And yet you don't mind sharing that with the company that's providing you that electricity. So
I thought about that before I opted for the sharing, and they have a protocol which anonymizes the data, right? So my customer information is not part of the usage data that they sort of gather from lots of homes and try to, do their calculations around load, and all those things. So I think that that's really important. It was a question that Sidewalk, I think Josh talks about this in his book a lot, that they didn't really address in a persuasive way.
Well, okay.
And that was a political problem.
You are leading me nicely to where we want to go next, which is, and we do want to talk about how Sidewalk went sideways, because initially, this whole thing was unveiled. You've given an example here of one very specific example in your very specific life. Sidewalk was going to build a whole community down at the waterfront in Toronto, which would have incorporated this idea and so many others into what was going to be a very smart neighborhood. And the appeal immediately among many political leaders, Josh, in this town was off the charts. A lot of people dove in. What did they love about it?
I think if you have to take a little bit of a step back about that, when you're thinking about what the world looked like in 2015, which sometimes seems like yesterday, but was actually 7 years ago, when Sidewalk Labs was sort of beginning, is just before this thing that was called the tech clash, where people started getting a little bit more paranoid about what might be collected about them. There was nothing more progressive than a job at Google or Facebook or Twitter. These really looked progressive in a sense that they were sort of advancing society sort of in a technological way. But technical progress is not necessarily political progress. But people who wanted to have the optics of looking politically progressive, such as, we had a liberal prime minister and a liberal premier at the time in 2017, when Sidewalk Labs first walked into Toronto, and
it was Kathleen Wynne.
Yeah, Kathleen Wynne and Justin Trudeau and John Tory, sort of a centrist, I guess. There was the optics were great. You got a co-sign from one of the biggest and most interesting companies in the world. As a result, there was very, very, very little scrutiny given by any of those levels of government when Sidewalk Labs walked to town. Then, after Sidewalk Labs started running into controversy, when very smart people, some of whom appeared on this show, started asking, how is this data going to be used? Should we be putting, how is data that's going to be collected of all these sensors they're describing in this RFP, how is that going to necessarily be used? All these governments were like, oh, wait, should we do something about this? And in the end, they didn't. That was 2017. It's 2022. And as an example, the federal government is still trying to figure out how to update its now 22-year-old private sector privacy law to even deal with. That's not even equipped to deal with social media as it existed in 2007.
Let alone today.
Let alone today.
Yeah. When the whole Sidewalk Labs project first came on the horizon, what did you think?
I remember there being a great deal of buzz about it. The lash didn't come out the gate, I think, as strong. Certainly, people were starry-eyed, wanting to learn more, thirsty for more information. Maybe not as thirsty as the political class for this very elusive thing called innovation. And I think once people wanted to, click further down, read more, understand it better, it became clear that there was a little bit of spaghetti at the wall. right? There was a tension between the current regulatory environment and the regulatory environment we needed in the future. There was ambiguity about intellectual property rights, the best kind of vehicles for data ownership. So I remember following everything with great interest and also really paying attention to how we presented power in the city, right? You had coalitions of former mayors, you had major urbanists signing letters, in the Globe and Mail, and you also had everyday people kind of demanding more and asking really important and tough questions. And I think a question still for me going forward is, did Toronto, make enough use of that opportunity to really keep thinking about the policy environment that we need in the future for smart cities? Just because Sidewalk Labs isn't here doesn't mean that this suite of technologies, there's still tons of research, innovation, lobbying, procurement all around making cities smarter.
But that's what I'm getting at. You're a tech person. Like you don't hate tech, right? You don't start from a default position of hating tech. So I wondered whether you were kind of very turned on by this idea of a smart neighborhood on the waterfront.
Was I turned on by it? I was certainly very intrigued by elements.
Yeah.
For sure. What could we learn? What's it going to look like? Heated sidewalk comes up a lot. I think some of the garbage elements. Maybe it's a function of my age and being a millennial and where I was in the city. The proportion of deep affordability, I think, was a fascinating aspect. And yeah, being a tech policy person, I have a healthy amount of skepticism, but I also care about having the right rules in place. I think the right rules make things better for everyone, companies included.
Now, when you saw the plans, at first blush, what did you think?
So I've been covering waterfront revitalization for a very long time, and so I was really interested in seeing what what the built form was going to look like. And so I remember actually sitting in a coffee shop reading that. How long was the PDF? Like 150 pages.
225. Yeah.
225.
The original one.
And thinking, there's a lot of language in there which just is very kind of out of step with what Toronto was doing in terms of its own plans for revitalizing the waterfront. So it immediately struck me as a change in direction. And then the other thing that struck me is that the way they conceptualized what they were trying to do, building a city from the internet up, struck me as being not unlike the App Store on your smartphone. That they would have all these people in the space, all these users, and that they would kind of allow, tech companies, software developers to come in, use that information and turn it into some kind of service. And it was seemed very open-ended to me. And then the third thing, you talk about this in your book, is that the word lab did not appeal to me at all. I'm interested in city building, which I don't think is, it has experimental components to it, but when you build a city, you want the city to be there. And so to me, it felt very provisional, and those were my first reactions.
In a way, Josh, I'm kind of asking you, to do in the next minute and a half what you've taken 350 pages to do in the book, which is to say, at first, this looked like it had a lot of the elements that Torontonians would like. Mm-hmm. It was futuristic looking. It was a big American company from New York coming up here saying, we want to make Toronto this jewel on the waterfront to show the whole world. And Toronto's got such a complex about being a world-class city, so it fit into all of that, right? But at some point, it went off the rails. And ultimately, obviously, it didn't happen. When did it start to go off the rails?
As soon as Sidewalk Labs and Waterfront in Toronto started speaking, it was very clear that there was a divergence in what they wanted. Sidewalk Labs, prior to ever coming to Toronto, was thinking about basically building, imprinting a whole new city, just like all over Detroit or on the outskirts of Denver, or over a piece of the Bay Area, just plopping a new city with a dome on top of it. At one point was one of their ideas, and then Waterfront Toronto said, we've got 12 acres. Would you like 12 acres? And we're going to have this contest for it. And Sidewalk Labs easily won that contest. But Sidewalk Labs is a Google affiliate company, was a Google affiliate company. Now it's part of Google because it doesn't exist anymore. And Google was an enormously ambitious company that wrote the rules of the internet economy. And the real life world of cities and democracies is a lot more rigid and messier than that. And so right from the beginning, you had a company that wanted more than 12 acres. throughout their request for proposals response and in stuff that I got over the course of reporting on the book, stuff that was never made public, they had made it clear they wanted a significant chunk of the portlands in the eastern waterfront. And that fundamentally was what the greatest misalignment was. What multiple people from all sides of this refer to as the original sin of the project was this sort of boring, bureaucratic Canadian tripartite government agency up against this sort of brand new side project of one of the most maverick-like companies ever to exist. And so there was constant clashes over who was going to present ideas versus approving them, and particularly around land, because Google thinks big. It wants scale in tech parlance. And Waterfront Toronto was really only prepared or even really legally able to give it the 12 acres. And then they would have to go through the very slow slog of sort of Toronto city building processes in order to be able to get anything more. And that just didn't work out.
So there's all that. And then, John, pick up the story from there. How much, in addition to all of that, was the notion that we're going to give up a lot of our personal proprietary information to this company, and we're not satisfied exactly what's going to be used with it? How much of that was part of the story?
Well, I think that was really a driving force in the story, and there were activists and people who were asking really important questions about how do you when you're walking through public space and there's sensors all around, how are you giving consent to them collecting information on you, right? Like, I have a dog. Why does anybody need to know that I'm taking my dog for a walk and what that route is, right?
And what was the answer to that question? Why did they want to know that information?
Because the business model, which never actually materialized, but the idea was that if you aggregate a lot of information, like you collect a massive amount of data, and then you let software developers have a go at it and see what they can do with it, then you can come up with kind of things that help the city, solutions that help the city, and that these are very tech connected. And so that was the sort of thinking, and that, and they said, they had a privacy commissioner on staff for a while, or privacy advisor on staff, and they said, okay, well, no names, we're going to anonymize everything. But in reality, you can de-anonymize data. You could use aggregated data for the wrong reasons, right? You could, if you have, if you surveil a park and you have sensors on park benches, for example, and you discover that there is a lot of activity at 4 o'clock in the morning on one particular park bench, you don't necessarily know who, but you can take steps to act on that information if you're the local government or if you're the condo board or whatever. So I think that their arguments were not persuasive about privacy protections. And as Josh mentioned, it came after Cambridge Analytica. It came after, there was like a big wake-up call about what how far tech can reach into your life, and how far should tech reach into a city. I mean, I want tech in the city, right? Tech is an important part. It builds our cities, but there's a balance, right? And I don't think that they found the balance.
Well, let's find out from Vass about that. When we use surveillance technology, which sounds more nefarious than perhaps it was intended to be, is there inevitably, at the end of the day, going to be a fight about privacy?
Absolutely. I mean, we've already heard this point that Canada has yet to fully update its federal privacy laws. We've been talking about the Sidewalk Labs plan, using that word plan. I think it was much closer to a pitch, something that's much more suitable for a venture capitalist audience in terms of on spec, on the promise of this vision. We're ready to fund you and we're ready to go forward. And Josh makes this point in his book very well. We saw behaviors that are very common to the digital economy where private companies have written the rules, such as app stores, spill over into our analog world, and they just didn't fit as well there. So yes, if we want to proceed with, surveillance technology for good or for the people, we're going to need better regulatory environments for people, but we also need to consider the competition implications. So a lot of my research focuses on competition, right? And we miss some of that. And John touches on this in his book. Some of the downsides of smart cities, potentially, vendor lock-in, interoperability.
What does all this mean?
Costs. Things like if in your TVO city, you sign a contract with, John's Sensors, and you're either locked in perpetuity, his business goes out of business, so you can't get an upgrade, he changes the price on you, you can't then buy camera sensors from Josh's company, right? You want to maintain flexibility. You want to allow for true competition, and you don't want municipalities to be on the hook in particular ways. We missed a little bit of that out the gate because certainly all of these companies are kind of fighting in kind of an arms race to become the de facto product and service provider of the quote-unquote idealized smart city, because that's a revenue stream for them as well.
Josh, you've chronicled how it went down. Is there a part of you in telling the story that regrets that it didn't happen?
I mean, it's interesting, right? Because like I'm a technology reporter. I fundamentally like sort of bask myself in sort of the technology of these companies. I carry a smartphone. I use a computer. I cannot get around the city without Google Maps. You know, to me, the idea of making city life better through technology, you know, is a way to make cities more equitable and more inclusive. You know, but for me, I guess, you know, as a reporter, I try not to sort of be prescriptive, but I think there was a missed opportunity in that this could have, you know, if this were thought through in a meaningful way on a partnership that was equal on all sides, that we could have had, you know, I really enjoyed covering this story because there was so much at stake and so many people who had just very emotional responses to everything that it felt very much like this battle over how, you know, power will be exerted in 21st century cities over the next hundreds of years. And so as a reporter, I, you know, enjoyed covering that. And I think we would have really had, Toronto could have been the center, not necessarily of, you know, shiny new technologies, but the center of, you know, debate about the future of what we want in society and what we should be prioritizing and what we want our governments rather to prioritize.
Gotcha. That was a great discussion, everybody. Do you mind if I plug your book here?
No.
I didn't think you would. That's John Lawrence. Dream States, Smart Cities, Technology, and the Pursuit of Urban Utopias is his latest contribution to this subject. And on the other side of the table, Vas Bednar, who is the master of everything at McMaster University. And Sideways, the city Google couldn't buy, is Josh O'Kane's contribution to this. And we are delighted that it has brought the three of you into our studio here at TVO tonight. Thank you all.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There's a version of the future where self-driving electric cars ferry people around in an emission-free but car-friendly world. Paris Marx is not buying it for a minute. Why not? Well, that's laid out in their new book. It's called Road to Nowhere: What Silicon Valley Gets Wrong About the Future of Transportation. Paris Marx hosts the podcast Tech Won't Save Us and joins us now here in our studio. Nice to meet you.
Good to meet you too.
Great to have you here. I want to start by just reading an excerpt of the book and then we'll dive in. The history of automobility is hardly a natural progression. Its present-day dominance of transportation systems in North America, Australia, parts of Europe, and increasingly in parts of the global south, is the product of a concerted effort by invested interests to completely overhaul the way we live and get around to serve their bottom lines. Instead of living within close proximity of our workplaces and the services we rely on, everything has been spread out so that we have to buy an automobile, insure it, get frequent maintenance, fill it up with fuel, and waste a growing amount of our time in traffic. There were opportunities to take a different path, but powerful interests won out and got the support of the state to subsidize and entrench their vision for the future. That's a very different take on things, as you well know. What's wrong with the notion that we have a transportation system that was developed ostensibly by capitalism, by the profit motive?
Well, I think it ends up serving a certain array of interests over what we actually need to get around, right? It doesn't best serve the communities, doesn't look to, you know, ensure that we get around in an efficient way, in an affordable way. It's how can we encourage people to spend more and more of their money on transportation, and then that benefits a whole load of different interests, whether it's auto companies or oil companies or, you know, various other interests that are associated with it.
Now, you live in Newfoundland.
Absolutely.
Has it been different in Canada, our experience? Is it different than that which you've just described?
No, I think it's quite similar, actually. You know, certainly we can look to the United States as somewhere where the automobile is maybe most entrenched, but very much that has, you know, carried over to Canada. We've made major investments in order to encourage people to use automobiles. Certainly when we look at, you know, the percentage of trips that people take using cars, it's really high because we have built our communities in such a way that for many people, you need a car just to get around.
Had it not unfolded the way it has, in other words, if we could go back and redesign it in a way that you think is more commodious to other interests, how would we have done things differently?
I think we wouldn't have put so much effort into encouraging people to drive, right? Because there was an opportunity to, sure, you have cars in there, but you also have many other different ways of getting around that work for people in their cities, right, that are convenient. But in many of the communities that we ended up building, as we built out the suburbs and expanded the size of cities, those communities were not built in such a way where it's easy to cycle to get where you're going to go, or easy to take transit. It's built in such a way that you basically need to drive, or you're going to be really inconvenienced when you need to get around.
The suggestion, though, seems to be that it was those sort of evil forces that foisted this system upon us, as opposed to our having chosen to do it this way, because a lot of people like living in the suburbs, and they like the wider roads, and they like the freedom that driving a car brings, etc. You don't buy that?
I think it's a mix, right? I think that there were definitely reasons to adopt that early on when it was being sold to people, right? And when you think of, visions of the future as they're often sold to people, when you think back to the early promise of the automobile, the amount of time you were going to spend stuck in traffic wasn't part of the promise. The amount of time you were going to have to spend on an automobile wasn't part of the promise. There were a whole load of things that weren't really part of the contract that was given to people for what this future, what this suburban future was going to look like. And I think now, a number of decades on, we can look back at that and say, okay, there were things that maybe made sense about what we were doing in that moment, but I think that we took it much too far. I think that we allowed the automobile to take over far too much, and that it's time for us to maybe reassess that past and think about what we're going to do in the future to rectify some of those problems that we've created.
And we shall get to that, but before we go there, why do you think it's important for people to understand the history of our cities and highways and why it sort of came to be this way?
Yeah, I think it can be easy to think, when we think about our cities right now, that this is the way it is, this is the way it's always been, this is the way it's always going to be, right? But going back and looking at that history shows us that it used to be very different, right? Our streets were not always kind of exclusive roadways for cars. Sure, there are some buses on there, streetcars, things like that, but largely the street is the space for the car. At one time, it was a much more kind of shared space for many different forms of transportation where people could walk, could bike, and because of the low speeds, this was navigated between a whole load of different people. And when the car really rolled out, we forget now that there was a lot of backlash to that by people who lived in cities who are experiencing the very direct downsides of that as people were dying, children in particular, and there were a lot of protests against it. And so I think that, understanding how the car came to be gives us more insight into, how we got to where we are today, and also kind of denaturalizes this system that we have right now and allows us to question, what we've built and also where it can go next.
I do remember seeing very old pictures of this city, though, before the car took over, and you've essentially got, you got dirt streets, right? You get dirt streets, no streetcars, very little vehicular traffic. I mean, you're not saying we can go back to that.
No, absolutely not. I'm not saying it was perfect and we need to look back to better days or anything. Just to say that the streets operated in a different way at one time. They can still operate in a different way again if we want to rethink, how we distribute space on the street, what forms of transportation we give priority to. Right now, a lot of priority is given to the car. And the question is, should we give more of that space over to cyclists or to bus lanes or things like that to encourage people to get around in a different way and to make it easier for people not to have to take a car to get around the city?
Part of the contract we have apparently made with the car involves, as you just indicated, a lot of death. And I want to just put some numbers here on the table that you talk about in your book. You have written, in the United States alone, 3.7 million people have been killed by motor vehicles since 1899. That's basically, I looked it up, that's Croatia, the country of Croatia, that's their population. In the year 2020, almost 40,000 Americans died in car accidents. And we shouldn't even call them accidents, because they're not accidents. A lot of people think we're dying by design. And yet, there are no demonstrations in the streets about the unsafety of our streets, our design, our failure to share the road appropriately. It seems to be a fact of life that we accept this much carnage on the roads. Why do you think?
I think it's quite troubling, right? I think it's quite troubling that it's been normalized to that degree, and certainly the death figures aren't as bad in Canada as they are in the United States, where it's particularly bad. But I think it's worrying that, we've just kind of accepted that this is the trade-off for having all these cars around, that people are naturally going to die when it doesn't have to be this way, right? When we can make different decisions, whether it is, just to change the way that automobility works, that our streets work right now to reduce the number of deaths that automobiles are causing, or to move away from having so many people dependent on automobiles altogether, right? There are actions that we can take today in order to reduce those deaths, but there's not the priority on it that I think there should be. And I think that there are some movements, some groups that are trying to call more attention to this, that are trying to force this to be more of a topic of conversation. Certainly there's the growth of, say, Vision Zero movements and things like that are trying to have those policies adopted to reduce those death numbers. But it's seriously concerning that this is a trade-off that we've made. And to relate it to something today, I think that we're also seeing a normalization with COVID and things like that, right? As these deaths continue, it's just something that we need to accept as part of living in society. And I think the question is, do we really need to accept that, or could we be doing things, whether it's to reduce road deaths, to reduce COVID deaths, that we've just decided we kind of collectively don't want to do?
Well, we seem to be going in the opposite way that you would like us to go, because I look at the 400 series highways in this province, the 401, the 400 and so on. They've increased the speed limits to 110 kilometers an hour. And my hunch is that if anybody ran for office on a pledge to reduce the speed limit in the city of Toronto, for example, or in Ottawa, to 30 kilometers an hour, as opposed to 50, drivers would rise up in arms. They'd be furious about it. No one could get elected on that platform. Doesn't this prove people love their cars? They love their freedom. They're prepared to put up with a lot of crap in order to have the freedom to drive.
It's a good question, and I think I would see it a little bit differently, right? I think I would see it that we've built a society where the majority of people are dependent on cars to get around, and so naturally anything that now kind of restricts them in their ability to do that as they perceive the quickest way as possible, they would be opposed to it. And I think you can completely understand that, even if, when you look at the traffic science behind that, you might say, increasing the speed limits to 110 isn't really going to allow people to get where they're going quicker for the most part. You're probably going to want to better control that, and that would lead to the system being more efficient and the traffic being more efficient. It's like, when there are proposals from time to time to add roads to highways or build new highways, there's plenty of traffic science that shows that that's probably not going to reduce traffic in the long term. People are still going to get stuck in traffic, but we keep doing it because there's an assumption that, people naturally assume that if you're going to add more highway space, you're going to be able to get there quicker, but actually we have decades of experience that shows us that's not really how it works.
Well, we just had an election in the province of Ontario back in June where the party that won pledged to build a new 400 series highway just about an hour north of here, and they won.
Absolutely.
There you go.
Yeah.
Let's do another quote from the book here.
Sure.
Sheldon, you want to bring this one up here? This is on the commercialization of the internet. We can observe the impact that the dominant interests of the 20th century have had on our lives, our communities, and the planet, and there is a lot that is not to like. However, the 21st century has a new set of powerful interests born out of the commercialization of the internet. And after amassing great fortunes of their own, they, too, want to make us dependent on their products, not just when we browse the web, but when we are out in our communities, too. Despite promises that their visions for transportation and the city will serve everyone, it is already becoming clear that those claims are nothing more than marketing material meant to build public support for their products that will ultimately serve their companies, their shareholders, and themselves. So you are making, obviously, a corollary here between what we've been talking about and now with the internet. And let's talk about Tesla, which everybody thinks is a fabulously innovative company and is doing things in a completely new and revolutionary way. You don't think so? Why not?
No, not exactly. I think Tesla's a really interesting example, right? I think it's been kind of positioned as the company that is leading us into the future of kind of the electric vehicle, right? I think it has certainly made some advances because of the people who were there before Elon Musk, and certainly the people who he depends on to actually do the work while he kind of, does the marketing, right? But I think that we were already kind of heading in a direction toward electric mobility anyway. There were car companies already working on it just before Tesla. Tesla certainly plays a role in making it more appealing to some people, but I think it's a direction we were going on anyway. And Tesla has also been pushing the notion that autonomous vehicles are right around the corner since about 2014, and they're still not here, and I don't think they're going to be here for a while yet.
There's still, there's a lot of testing going on still.
Absolutely.
And a lot of hope that that may be the way to go. You're not sold.
No, I think that the past 8 years of talk around autonomous vehicles has really served to distract us from the conversations that we should be having about transportation in our cities, right? The autonomous vehicle promised that it was going to reduce traffic, make transportation more accessible to people who are underserved by the system right now, eliminate road deaths. Meanwhile, as you were saying, road deaths are increasing in the United States. More and more people are stuck in traffic for longer. The autonomous vehicle is nowhere to be seen in any kind of mass sense. It's just being tested. Meanwhile, we could have been taking actions for those 8 years to try to remedy some of those problems, actions that we don't need new technology for.
What do you find particularly problematic about Uber from a technology innovation standpoint?
Many things. We could talk for a long time about Uber. I think at the core, though, Uber really emerges out of the recession period, right? Really takes advantage of a lot of precarious labor that existed as a result, people who had lost their jobs during the recession, and really promised that by using these technologies in a way to upend the taxi system, we were going to make transportation a lot more efficient in cities. And what independent researchers have found is that basically all the promises that they made about the improvements they were going to deliver were not followed through on, and they actually made traffic worse in cities. They didn't really serve the underserved. They didn't reduce car ownership. They took people away from transit, so it's making those trips more efficient, or more inefficient, sorry. And then, the core of that as well is Uber has spent a lot of time lobbying against the rights of its drivers to ensure that they're carved out of employment protections, treated as independent contractors. And that's not only a problem for those drivers and the people who are in the gig economy, but also if they're successful in entrenching that, presents the threat of more companies, reclassifying their workers in that way to carve them out of the protections that they should have.
You ever take Uber?
I've been in an Uber one time.
And?
It was like a taxi, basically. A friend called it when it arrived. I didn't know about it, but when it was there, I said, well, it'd be mean to the guy to not take it, so we just made sure we tipped him well.
Like a taxi, except you could order it on your phone, and I know you can for some taxis now.
Yeah.
But when it emerged, you can order it on your phone, probably a nicer car,
yeah,
and probably cheaper. You don't think that's an innovation?
Not really. Certainly moving to being able to hail it on your phone, that's, something new. As you say, a lot of taxi companies have adopted it. It's not a real kind of transformation of the taxi industry. The key there, though, is the cost, right? The promise was that this is going to be cheaper, it's going to be more efficient than the taxi system that exists right now. A big part of the reason that Uber was cheaper than the taxi industry is that it lost billions of dollars a year in order to finance its growth, and it still loses money to this day. It's not a profitable company. And so it benefited from losing all that money because investors kept giving it money to lose, because we were in an era where money was cheap, it was easy to access that capital, but also it was able to take advantage of the fact that its workers had fewer rights and fewer protections, and it was able to pay them less and push down their wages. And so I don't think that's really an innovation we should be, looking to
trumpeting, right?
Exactly.
And I guess I should say, it can be cheaper. If you take it in off-peak hours, if you share a ride with somebody else, can be cheaper. Otherwise, it can be just as expensive as a taxi.
Absolutely. But then the other piece of that as well, as you said with the vehicles, is that everyone has to own their own vehicle. You don't have this fleet that you're managing. And so there are experts who, I've read their work, and they suggest that the Uber model is actually less efficient because you don't have the fleet to manage, but you also have these really expensive headquarters, the tech engineers that are paid a lot of money, instead of the kind of lower cost taxi model that actually has some efficiencies in there that are important.
Well, you've made the case in this that you think we ought to do things differently.
Yeah.
Okay, such as, what would you like to see happen?
So, as we were talking about, I think that we need to see less of a focus on the automobile, right? Especially in this moment where we recognize that there needs to be a change in the way that people get around, both for the reasons, as we talked about, the deaths that are happening, the amount of time people are stuck in traffic, but also when we recognize the contribution of transportation to climate change. There is a moment here where we need to decide what the future of our transportation system is going to look like. And so there's one direction where we make a lot of investments in electric cars, but we still have people largely stuck in their cars as they are today. Or we put a lot more focus in investing in transit infrastructure to expand that, to make it more reliable, more affordable for people. We expand cycling infrastructure so that we ensure that people can safely get where they need to go. They can store their bikes and know it won't get stolen. We make communities where you can actually access more of the things that you need, in proximity to where you live, so you don't need to actually travel as far to reach these things. And we have better transportation between our cities as well, whether it's better rail networks, high-speed rail, from Windsor to Quebec City, for example.
Which they've only been talking about for half a century.
Exactly. So there are things that we can do today to make these changes, to try to encourage people and to make it easy for people to get around in a different way. As I said, going back to the history in the book, I really explored how there were a lot of investments, a lot of regulatory changes, a lot of tax measures put in to encourage people to move to the suburbs, to build the suburbs even, to adopt cars. And I think that we need to look at that infrastructure that we've put in place, that set of laws and regulations, and see if we need to start, rearranging those to encourage a different way of living, a different way of getting around.
Well, I think we got somewhere with that conversation. In contrary to the title of the book, which is The Road to Nowhere. What Silicon Valley gets wrong about the future of transportation. It's brought Paris Marx to our studio, and we are delighted to have you here. Thanks so much.
I really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Urban planning shapes the cityscapes and community spaces that make up the built environment people share in their daily lives. Cheryl Case is the founder and executive director at CP Planning, and she's interested in adding another dimension to what goes into such plans, a better understanding of how space can affirm or constrain human rights. Hi, Cheryl.
Hi, Nam. Great to be here.
It's nice to see you in person, because I think we've only spoken online before, like on Skype and Zoom. So your organization takes a human rights approach to community planning. What does a human rights approach to planning mean?
So a human rights approach to planning means centering the lived experience of those who are marginalized, who don't have access at the moment to their core needs, which are affordable housing, good jobs, and access to cultural services. So in centering their lived experiences, we're centering, producing outcomes that will help to better their access to those needs.
Because I think when people think about planning, which is essentially like how communities are made, we don't think about human rights. Why should we think about human rights when we plan neighborhoods?
Yeah, so we should think about human rights when we plan neighborhoods, because in dealing with land, that's we're the foundation of our economy, right? And so in planning the built environment, you're also planning access to jobs, to housing, and so these things are incredibly central. If you think about, even to know that we're standing on stolen land, right? So the human rights of Indigenous people to be part of this planning process, to have their cultural needs met. These are things that are recognized not just in Ontario via the Ontario Human Rights Commission, but also nationally. The United Nations acknowledges the human rights of Indigenous peoples and all peoples to have access to affordable housing, to good jobs, and to cultural services.
So what would you say is the problem that you're trying to address?
Yeah, so the problem that we're addressing is that marginalized people are not having their voices acknowledged.
How would you define marginalized people first?
Yeah, so marginalized people include those who are, let's say, making minimum wage, those who are living in housing and they're paying 40-50% of their income on housing, and they're not able to afford food, right? And they're going to have to go to food bank, and they're stressing over making ends meet at the end of the month, right? So those would be, and you look at marginalized people, that would be a really great example. Of course, we have people who are homeless, who are even more marginalized. Folks who don't have opportunity to think about what types of job do I want to go into, right? There is a huge lack of access, if you bring it back to planning, to have access to being a part of the planning process, right? If you look at the chief planners across Ontario, they're not necessarily as reflective of the demographics that are being served, right? In Toronto, we haven't yet had a person of color serve as our chief planner. And in terms of the planning process and what we look at and prioritize, affordable housing has just not been at the top of the list because, again, the marginalized people are not having their voices heard, despite the fact that they are very vocal, right? So, learning about how when we were planning the Eglinton LRT in Toronto, there were communities that were expressing the need for greater prioritization of affordable housing. You'll see the same thing in Ottawa, that, the LRT is going to lead to gentrification. We need to be making sure that affordable housing is being planned. The same thing in Hamilton, same thing in Kitchener-Waterloo. People were expressing the need for affordable housing, yet we do not see any affordable housing plans established along these LRT lines.
So help us understand, why do we need affordable housing around transit?
Yeah, so we need affordable housing around transit because you look at it in one level, right? So this is billions of dollars being invested into transit with the intention that it's there to help people move from point A to point B, right? So you look at this public investment, right? This is taxpayer dollars being used with the intention of helping people move from point A to point B. What you're seeing happen, though, is that that public investment is being privatized, where the people who own that property adjacent to the transit, they're jacking up their rents. They're selling their properties to developers, and developers are selling at market price the new housing. And so these same areas are actually where you find oftentimes the highest volumes and densities of renters in lower income households, right? So in Brampton, for example, along the transit line of Huron, Ontario, and their plan to build denser transit along Main Street is where you have the highest volume densities of renters. And so when you're building new development and there's no plans for affordable housing, you're gonna have, again, the private owners jacking up the rents, selling, and then developers selling for market rate. And then you're going to see these renters now being pushed out and displaced. So the role of the city would be to advocate and to engage marginalized people so that the plan around that development keeps them in mind and allows them to stay in the neighborhood that they have known and loved for so long.
So let's talk more about solutions. What are solutions that you're proposing?
Yeah, so city planning is really excited to be launching a project called the Roadmap for Redevelopment Plans to Confront Systemic Racism. So this project is conducted in partnership with neighborhood associations and community groups and nonprofits across Toronto, Peel, Hamilton, York, Kitchener-Waterloo, and Ottawa. All the cities that have had major investment in transit. And so in partnership with these nonprofits, we're operating something that we're calling inclusive neighborhood planning hubs. And so we're actually going to be working directly with neighborhood residents to build capacity and to build community where folks are able to talk about their housing needs, their housing interests, to build allyships with local homeowners who don't necessarily personally need affordable housing access, but they are invested in the well-being of their fellow resident, and to together build local strategies to build affordable housing in those neighborhoods.
Well, these neighborhood planning hubs, what would they look like and how would they work?
Yeah, so the foundation of how this is working is based on the work that we've been doing in Little Jamaica over the last 2 years. So with Oakwood Vaughan Community Organization, this is a wonderful association of local residents who are incredibly committed to their community. And so they are, a group of volunteers who meet every month. We meet every month and we review the project plan and we discuss, okay, how do we adjust and how do we adapt the project plan? And that's, again, the local nonprofit who I work with on that. And so while we're doing that steering work, we are also operating local working groups. So we have a working group that's looking to explore establishment of a community land trust. That's a model where you're able to build and maintain affordable housing in perpetuity. And we're also doing engagement with local homeowners, right? Because a lot of homeowners we found actually are really interested in building affordable housing. They just don't have the tools, they don't have the knowledge. And they also don't have the support to help them carry through all the difficult conversations needed to get from an idea to execution on affordable housing. So that property owner outreach is actually incredibly important in our work. And the other component of this working group is that we're going to be engaging directly with tenants, folks who are most at risk of being displaced. And so as we build a community of tenants, as we build affordable housing, we'll be able to actually direct for those tenants to have access to that housing so that they can stay in those neighborhoods that they've loved and been a part of.
When you said Little Jamaica, it was hard for me not to smile because Little Jamaica is such an important neighborhood in the city. When I first moved to Toronto, it was the first place that I went to just try to find some community. We only have like a minute left, but if this project achieves what you hope it will achieve, what will a CP planning neighborhood look like and how many of them will there be?
Yeah, I love that question. So CP planning neighborhood will look like, it would be people living in community. Right now, especially with COVID and with Zoom kind of that we're still dealing with, people are stuck in their houses, and then they'll go out to an event here and there. But to be actually engaged in your community and to have folks in your community that you meet maybe every week or every other week, and you're doing not just intentional planning work, but you're also having a lot of cultural opportunities as well, right? Because it's the people in Oakwood Vaughan, they deeply love their community. They love the residents in their community. And to be able to see that type of love expressed through practice and through continued collaboration, right? So it's not just the housing that would be built, it would be the flourishing of culture and of connections. And that's, I think, what a city planning neighborhood
The community
like.
and the neighborhood flourishing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Cheryl, for your time. I learned a lot. We appreciate your insights and can't wait to see where your project goes.
Thank you so much, Dom.
Thanks.
Great to be here.
And that is the agenda for Thursday, October 27th, 2022. Tomorrow, Nan Kiwanuka gets an update on the hearings underway in Ottawa about the federal government's decision to invoke the Emergencies Act earlier this year to deal with the protest convoy in Ottawa and points beyond. Hope you'll join us for that. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org. And Nam, we'll see you here tomorrow.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
TVO.org has a new look online. For the latest Ontario current affairs from our digital team, from The Agenda, of course, and for all of our podcast documentaries and programs, check out the slick website at TVO.org.